Introduction. Before 1860, there were about 4 million slaves in America. They lived and worked in the South. Most of them wanted to escape to the North to freedom, and thousands of them did. From the very beginning of American history, slaves fled from their owners. They were called fugitives. The great majority of fugitive slaves ran away between 1830 and 1860. They traveled on the most famous road of the day, the Underground Railroad. There were great dangers for those who traveled this way, as well as for those who helped them. This book is about this mysterious railroad, how it worked, who rode it, and why its very name meant freedom. What was the Underground Railroad? The Underground Railroad wasn't a real railroad. It was the secret way to get from the South and slavery to the North and freedom. Sometimes you would ride on a real railroad, sometimes in a horse drawn cart, sometimes in a fancy carriage, sometimes on a boat, sometimes on horseback. And much of the time you would walk. The whole trip was called the Underground Railroad. When you traveled in this secret way, you stayed at special hiding places throughout the South and North. Often you had to find your own hiding places. Other times, people hid you until you could travel on. The houses the slaves hid in along the way were called stations. People who helped the fugitives were called railroad workers. Some were conductors. They would lead you to the next station. Others were station masters. They would feed you and give you a place to sleep until you left for the next station. How did the Underground Railroad get its name? There is a story of a runaway slave named Tice Davids. Sometime in the year 1831, he escaped from his owner's home in Kentucky and swam across the river to the town of Ripley, Ohio. The owner could see Davids in front of him crossing the river, but when Davids landed on the shore, he vanished from sight. The owner searched all through the town, but Davids was nowhere to be found. Finally, the owner gave up and went home to Kentucky. He could not figure out what had happened to Tice Davids. Bewildered, he shook his head and said, "He must have gone on the Underground Road." Soon, many people knew about Tice Davids' escape. Steam engines, trains had just been invented, and people began to say that Davids had escaped on an underground railroad. The name stuck, and from then on, whenever slaves escaped, people said they had traveled on the Underground Railroad. It was a perfect name, underground because it was secret and you couldn't see it, and railroad because it seemed to run regularly and swiftly. When did the Underground Railroad start running? The first slaves were brought to America in 1619, and there were escapes from then on. The Underground Railroad didn't get its name until the 1800s, but whatever people called it, there were slaves who ran away from their owners to live in freedom. Some escaped into the forests and swamps of Florida to live with the Seminole Indians. Others ran away to live in a part of America ruled by Spain or to the northern states where slavery was not allowed. Some slaves even ran away to fight on the side of the British during the American Revolutionary War. The British promised them freedom. The Americans made no promises. That's why some blacks said that July 4th was not their Independence Day, and as long as there was slavery in America, they were right.